We are recording, everyone on their best behavior. What I wanted to do this morning, there's a lot in this Parsha, Parsha's Bo. Anybody who remembers great advertising campaigns from the 1980s, we say Bo knows Parsha. If you get that, good for you. The Parsha has the quick way you always remember that you have the last three plagues, 8, 9, and 10 are in the Parsha because the word Bo, Beis Aleph, is 3. So that's how it's a cute way of remembering always that that's the three final plagues. I always ask at the Seder, and I mean, after all, it is almost Pesach, so we have to start thinking about it. But I always ask at the Seder, when we go over the plagues, of course, a highlight. The plagues are a big highlight for everyone's Seder. You know, we have the puppets and the figures and the stuff that all kinds of shtick that people do, which is great because we need to get everybody engaged at the Seder. And for some reason, I guess plagues does it for people, and I don't know why, but it does. But what I always ask the question of which do you, aside from the last one, because people actually died, and in the first 9 people didn't die necessarily. Which do you think is the worst plague? I always throw that question out. Which do you think is the worst plague? And we get a lot of it's great for a conversation at the Seder. Lots of good discussion and things come about as a result. But what do you think is the worst one? So if anybody wants to take a stab and just kind of express any thoughts on that, by all means. Please do so. I'm assuming people are there. I see lots of boxes. That's good. See, I love people who are bold enough to go on camera. It's really exciting.
We're here.
I should black out my screen too. Then can I do that? Does it still? If I do that, does it still work? Does it Okay, here we go. Okay. Any thoughts on that? What do you think would be the again, aside from the final plague, which people die, which do you think would be the hardest to endure?
Darkness.
Not anybody at once.
Darkness.
Oh, okay. See, why do you say that?
I don't know if you could function. I don't know. That's just my gut answer.
Well, they say great minds think alike, because that's always my answer, which is, and by the way, this was not a plant. This was completely, just natural, as organic, as they say. But that's what I want to discuss. I want to discuss the plague of darkness, because in my mind, and when we read through the Psukim, and what I want to do is I want to just look through some of the Mefarshim. When we read through what happened, it's really scary. I don't know, if you've ever had this experience. Let's say there's a blackout, and you don't have any light at all, and you become completely disoriented, and you're just trying to get to a place where, let's say, you could find the candles, or you could find, it's the middle of the night and you're looking for the flashlight, and how many things you're bumping into, and it's very scary. It's a very, very scary thing. They have these restaurants where I've never done such a thing, but they have these restaurants where you're completely in the dark and you have this kind of sensory experience. Yeah.
Blind museum in Israel.
Yes, the blind museums. Yeah. And it gives you an unbelievable perspective of, first of all, the gift of sight and what that means. So I'm going to first just read through the Psukim. If you have a Chumash, I'm going to pull up the sources in a second anyway. But if you have the Chumash, it's on page 344. And, just kind of we finished the plague of locusts. And
Rabbi, can I ask you a favor? I don't have the same Chumash. Is it possible to say the parak in the pasuk if it's not too much trouble?
I think I can manage to do that. I think I can.
Thank you.
It's Exodus, Shmos Perek Yud, chapter 10, verse 21 through 29. So let me know when you have it. What Chumash are you using, Gail?
Thank you. It's what I happen to have in the house. It's called the it's commentary by Rabbi Hirsch, but it's not
Rav Hirsch.
Chumash.
Okay, Rav Hirsch's Yortzeit was just this past week. Anyway, so it's chapter 10, and it gets thrown in there. There's no great, and by the way, it's a good study of the plagues to look at the pattern of the plagues and how each one was introduced and how each one stopped, etc. So the Torah just says, Vayomer Hashem al Moshe. Hashem just says there's no warning, there's no forecast. They didn't say, Paro, we're going to bring this terrible thing upon you. He just says to Moshe, Neteya decha al hashamayim, stretch forth your hand towards the heavens. Vihi choshech al eretz Mitzrayim v'yamesh choshech. And this is a great word. This is what we're going to focus on a lot, on those two words. And he says, I'll read you the Art Scroll translation, and there shall be darkness upon the land of Egypt, and the darkness will be tangible. Tangible. Gail, I'm curious, what is the Hirsch Chumash? How does it translate that?
So it says, hold on. Then God said unto Moses, stretch out thine hand towards heaven, that there may be darkness over the land, even darkness which may be felt.
Oh, felt. Okay, so it's the same idea. Tangible, darkness which can be felt. Now, any idea? And I'm like, it's a strange word. What does that mean to feel darkness? Is this an emotional feelings, like I need to talk about my feelings type of thing? Or is this something, when it says the word tangible, meaning that it's a sensory thing, that I can actually touch the darkness? Now, we can't usually touch darkness, right? Darkness is the absence of light. So how is that something that you could touch via mesh? So we'll look into that. So Moshe does so, and it's interesting that he stretches his hands al hashamayim. Now, here it says towards el, but really al, like on the heavens. Interesting words also. And there was choshech afela, a thick darkness. Right? We use the word afela. Ume'afela, me'afela la'ora. We say it in Achenu. And all of Egypt, 3 days. Lo ro'u ish es achiv v'lo kamu ish mitachtav shaloshes yamim. V'chol b'nei Yisrael haya or b'Moshe Osam. Now, this is a great, by the way, this is a great verse. If you ever have to, give a sermon or something, or you need to give a Dvar Torah and you need to get all, preachy. So you could say there was darkness in all of Egypt 3 days. One man did not see his fellow man. One man didn't get up from where he was sitting for 3 days. However, for all the Jewish people, there was light in their dwelling. What does that mean? So you could take from a homiletic point of view is, which we're going to see actually later on, which is a reason why people don't like certain interpretations. But maybe the plague of Egypt, what's the plague of darkness, is that when we can't see another person suffering, when we don't bother to get up for someone else who's in need. Lo kamu ish, when a person doesn't get up. However, for Bnei Yisrael, there was or b'Moshe Osam, there's always light. Light is always spreading. You need a little bit of light, and that can light up an eternity. Okay. So Moshe then is called by Paro. Paro calls him and he says, okay, go. And you can give whatever, and you take all the stuff that you want. And then he says he's not going to do it. Fine. Now, it doesn't say that he asked for him to stop the plague. Notice that it doesn't say, oh, I can't take this. He just says, go. And then they said, fine. And it seems that the plague sort of stops on its own. Okay, so now what I want to do is, and this is an interesting exercise, is to just look through what we call Mikros Gedolos. Now, there are different versions, different types of Mikros Gedolos. When we say Mikros Gedolos, we mean we have Chumashim that have a bevy of interpretations and commentaries on them. And over time, there's certain that are sort of been canonized inside of the Mikros Gedolos. And what I'm going to show you is actually Art Scroll published in the last couple of years. They have redone the Mikros Gedolos with a nicer font, typeset, vowels, etc. And they've added some things that are not usually in there. And then you probably have something called Toras Chaim, the Mosada Rav Kook version, which has pretty much only Rishonim from the Middle Ages. But we're going to look through and we're just going to see, we're going to examine, we're going to explore some different text. Okay, here we go. You see my screen? You see it? Give me a thumbs up. Okay, good. Thank you. I'm so happy when Miriam Schwartz is not in school and she has time off. She can come to the shiur. That's so exciting. Okay, so here we go. So this is just, again, this is taken from this volume right here. No, I'm sorry, that's the wrong one. It's taken from this volume. I have so many books. This right here is the Art Scroll Mikros Gedolos. I happen to think they did a really, really good job on it. Okay, and we're just going to kind of walk our way through it and examine it, and we're going to see some different things. And don't worry. There's no translations here, but not to worry. I'll translate everything that we do. But just to give you an idea, and then we're going to look at some achronim, which are not on this page, and then you'll understand why I'm doing what I'm doing. Okay, so here on the first page. Now, by the way the page is broken up, there's, let's say, one page of text, right? So this here, where my cursor is, that's just the text, and the rest is interpretation. So they could have that. You could have 3-4 lines of text, and then two pages of commentary, which is why. So this one volume here is just Shemos. That's a lot there. Okay, so we're going to look basically at the first two psukim. Okay, so we have Makkat Choshech. Okay, so first thing, of course, we always do is we look at Rashi. Look at Rashi. Who's here? Oh, Cheva Come Lately is here. I need time to so I can get her in and pick on her and whatever. Oh, good morning, Vivian.
Good morning. I just lost you again. I'll be back.
I hear you, which is good. That's all.
All right, I'll be there. Don't worry. Thank you.
I'll be there. Okay. So here we go. So Makkat Choshech, Rashi says, V'yachshich aleihem choshech yoser mecheshko shalayla. The choshech shalayla ya'amish v'yachshich od. He's like, so Rashi basically saying, first of all, is that, what does it mean you're going to have this sort of tangible darkness? Meaning it's going to be darker than dark. It's going to be really dark. It's going to be darker than night. Now, if you've ever gone out, now we don't necessarily see pure darkness. First of all, we have electricity, or we have, one of the, there was a great article, I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity, there's a great article in Jerusalem Report a couple of issues ago about, there's a guy who's he made Aliyah, and his whole life is now he does stargazing tours in the Negev. So if you've ever gone to, let's say, the Bereshit Hotel, and Chedva, I'm gonna unmute you. Yeah, unmute. You have to unmute Chedva if you're talking. I can't hear you.
I did it.
Oh, you did it. Okay.
I did it with he looks like a Teletubby.
Yeah, there's a guy there, and he takes care of his sheep. But one of the reasons that well, wait a minute, I can go in my backyard. Yeah, except that we have so much what's called light pollution, and when you go down in the desert, I was actually in the desert, in the the top of the Negev area and the Judean desert when they had the eclipse a number of years ago in the summer. It was really cool, but you could see the purity of the sky. But when it's hard to imagine what pure darkness looks like, because even when it's dark out, there's still light around because of whatever's going on around us. So to see real darkness is really hard. When I used one of the greatest jobs I ever had. When I was first married, I was a rabbi of a camp. Okay, so that's actually how I know Dina. I met Dina for the first time. Dina's father, Wally Green, was he was in Camp Rowley for a million years, and he ran the camping trips, all kinds of great stuff. He taught us songs that we still sing to our kids. But I was a rabbi of Camp Rowley the last 2 years of Camp Rowley. Oh, Shalom. Oh, what a great experience. So we used to drive around in the mountains at night or whatever. And I used to, because me being me, so I would shut the lights off on the country roads. While we're driving at night, my wife would freak out. I'm like, what are you doing? Just for shtick. I don't know. I guess I have issues. But there, when there's nothing around, there's no electricity, then you see real darkness like that. So that's the first thing Rashi says. It's going to be darker than night. Next, Yamesh. Now here, everybody going to see the word, if I were to ask you, let's say from my great Hebrew linguists here, what do you think is the shorish of the word yamesh, v'yamesh? Any ideas?
Masos,
Which means?
to touch.
Right. So when we almost we're going to see some people say that, or we're going to say maybe related to that is when we say, you ever heard the word oh, that's mamish, a great thing. Mamash, mamashut, mamoshes. I can't say mamashut, it's just not part of my DNA. Mamoshes, when something is mamish, gewaldig, mamish means that there's substance to it. There's a reality, there's a tangible substance. So Rashi says, via amesh, he says, yesh lono tevos harbe chaseros aleph. He says, first of all, the the source, the shorish is has an aleph, and he goes on a whole diktuk lesson here, and he goes all kinds of, these are the ones that we always skipped over in school, okay? But you see that he goes, that he has to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what the root of this word is, because there's not so many like it. And down here he says, Midrash Agada Posra Lashon Mimashesh Batzaharayim. He says that the darkness was so thick, it was doubled over and over. It was so thick that it actually had a tangible feeling to it, which is why people say that. Okay. Now he continues, Rashi does. This is one of my favorite Rashi's always learning growing up, which used to scare the choshech out of me. Choshech shel ofel shel ro ish es achiv shalosh yamim. So the pasuk says there was 3 days of darkness. A person didn't see his friend, and a person didn't get up 3 days. So Rashi actually says there was 2 sets of 3 days. First, there was 3 days where a person didn't see someone, and then there's another 3 days where it was double that a person didn't get up. Yoshev and Yachol Lamod Omeid Ein Yachol Leishev. If you were standing, it was so thick that you were stuck. You were frozen. And if you were sitting, you were frozen. You couldn't move. Now, by the way, that's what makes this, and there's only one word that comes to mind here for me is debilitating. Is imagine being trapped where you have, and you always think, by the way, how horrible it is. I used to be a chaplain in Kessler Institute. And the most excruciating thing is you see people who have their complete mental faculties, but they cannot physically move. And they are trapped in their own bodies. It's a horrible existence. He says, now Rashi goes on to say, why did there choshech? I'm not really interested in this. I'm talking about the actual choshech itself. So if we look down here, now here we have now the Ibn Ezra and the Rashbam. The Rashbam, by the way, is the grandson of Rashi. You should know here, okay. He just a similar note via Amesh again with that aleph, Shem Aravi, basically saying that we have sometimes an aleph in the shorish, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't necessarily get included. He says Kolomer hachoshach shalayla ya'amish v'afil zman meruba shelo ha'ira halayla ad shloshes yamim. In other words, we're just lasting a very long time. Okay, now v'yamesh choshech, v'chi yamesh choshech v'lo yamish. Hatam ki amish kol choshech shehaya lahem yadua v'yavo achar av mimenu acher av mimenu. He says because there was a darkness, and then there was another one that was thicker that was coming after it. V'yesh omrim ki hu chaser aleph umilas emesh b'loshon hakodesh halayla she'avar. He says actually it's missing an aleph, but we say the word emesh. Emesh means yesterday. There's etmol and there's shalshom. Emesh actually means the day before last, yesterday, or depending like the day before now. And he says halayla she'avar kamo emesh amar alai ubilshon avi emes ki ashin is chalef b'samach. So by the way, one rule of thumb is that when the mefarshim, when they all say different types of things and different sources of the shorish, it means that they're really confused. And it could be this, it could be that. We just know like it was something bad, it was something thick, something. He says, and he quotes all this, he says, Ve'hine ein tam leperusham. He says there is no reason why they have to go and say this and that, which is typical Ibn Ezra. Ibn Ezra, by the way, was a linguist. Ibn Ezra often will cite the sources of the words that we have here in Tanakh. He says, however, according to what I think, ki v'yamesh is migizras yimashesh, right? Like you said, Dolores, right? Yimashesh. And he quotes the pasuk in Devarim. If you want to look up Devarim Chav Ches, it's 28:29. I'll just pull it up for you right now. 28:29. It's just in the Tochacha, and the pasuk says, "V'hayisa mimashesh batzaharayim kasher yimashesh avir ha'iver ba'afela." You will grope at noontime as a blind man gropes in the darkness. Yamashesh says you're trying to grab onto something. You're trying to get a hold of something. He says, "Ve'ein tana ba'avur shehu mipalei hakefel ki kamo b'zeini develei mishon v'shav el mitzrayim ki mitzrayim lashon achid." Again, very technical grammar type of Ibn Ezra, which is not unusual. But he says, "V'hinei hatam shimashashu bi'adam hachoshech." But Shekol kach of ki haor shel eish lo yidlak v'lo haner. He says, but the point is that we're trying to have an understanding where there is some sort of feel to the darkness. Normally, we associate darkness with what we can't see. We don't necessarily use the sensory touch. That one of our senses. We use the sense of seeing. But he says this is not about seeing; it's about feeling.
Can I say something?
Sure.
In that restaurant where we went, where it was totally dark and the waiters and waitresses were blind, the only way we had any kind of, we can get our bearings was by touching, like to pour a glass of water. You needed to pour a glass of water. So I figured out if I could find the glass and put my finger into the glass, when I was pouring the water, I knew when it got near the top and I would stop pouring. So feeling in the dark is a very important thing.
Right. So that's, you're talking about feeling in order to adapt to what you can't see. So here what the Mefarshim are pointing out is that there is actually something about the darkness that you can feel. Almost as if the darkness had a solid substance to it or something like that. But you're right. One of the greatest talks that we ever had here, we had Cliff Aaron from our shul. He talked. Cliff Aaron has something called RP, which is retinitis pigmentosa, and he became blind. And now he comes to shul with his guide dog. That used to be the only thing that kept my son quiet in shul, is that they would lie down on the floor under the chairs and they would face each other. And Moshe would look at the dog. The dog's name was Ford. Ford would look at Moshe and they would like keep each other quiet. But he came and he spoke and he described, and by the way, he's a practicing trial attorney. I actually have him scheduled to speak for a seat program at Kushner High School. We're just trying to work out the schedule, but it's an incredible thing about what it's like for him to get through an average day of his life. Something that we can even hard to identify. And they spoke about it, and his wife spoke about it. It was really something. So let's see. Look, Rabbeinu Bachya. Now again, this Rabbeinu Bachya, some people say Rabbeinu Bachaya, depending on how you pronounce it. But Rabbeinu Bachya, which again was not found in the traditional Mikros Gedolos, Art Scroll has since added it in, which I think is a great addition. Here he says, I'm looking at the second column here by cursor. The Timsa beParsha Shalosh Pa'amim Choshech, V'hi Choshech, V'yamesh Choshech, V'yamesh Choshech, V'hi Choshech Afilah. He says 3 times it says Choshech. Lirmos Ki Shlosha Mine Choshechem. And he says, no, further, there's actually 3 types of darkness. Okay, so already that's not unusual. When we say things, and one of the things specifically in Lashon HaKodesh is Lashon HaKodesh doesn't necessarily have synonyms, right? Like when if I say I want to say something in Hebrew, there is lemor, there is ledaber. If I want to see something, there's lirot, there's lehabit, there's lehistakel. But each one connotes a different type of, there's gazing versus glancing versus peering, so all these things, that's one of the beauties of Lashon HaKodesh. We don't really have synonyms. So he says the fact that there's 3 times it uses the word choshech is symbolic of 3 types of darkness. Ve'elohem alata, afela, arafel. There is darkness, and darkness. What does that mean? Alata hu choshech shel bein habisarim shene'amar va'alata haya. When Abraham was put in this sort of trance, and he was given the covenant between the halves, which is how we got to this story to begin with. And it says there that that Hashem put Abraham in some sort of sleep. It says, "Vayhi Hashemesh ba'a va'alata haya." So here they translate the sun set, and our scroll says, and it was very dark. But there's the type of darkness where you're going to have this sort of vision. Afela is choshech shel Mitzrayim. Shenema v'choshech afela. Afela is this choshech. And when we say ume afela laora, we're talking not necessarily from a physical darkness, but from a spiritual or a darkness of pain that we want to come to light. And arafel is choshech shel matan Torah. And there's a darkness when it came to giving the Torah. Shenemar u'Moshe nigash el ha'arafel. And he goes and Moshe. So in other words, the Rabbeinu Bachya points out that there are different types of darkness, different types of experiences. So what is V'yamesh Choshech then? You'll feel it. So Perish, just make it a little larger for you. V'yachshich Choshech. V'himaloshon emesh. Again, similar to what the Eben Ezra had quoted from the word emesh, which means yesterday. V'hakavana she'achshich aleiha machoshech yoser michoshech halayla. That it's going to be darker than dark. It's going to get more night than night. Or Yihyev v'yamesh milashon lo yamish. Lashon hasara lo yamish means you shall not remove. Kolomar achar sheyusar choshech halayla. After there's you take out the darkness of night, it's not going to be removed. Umikan shemakas choshech hischeh ba'or habokar achar she'avar halayla. He says it tells you that the nighttime never ended, meaning that when the day came, the day didn't come. The night just kept going and it never ended. Again, if people have ever traveled, let's say to see white nights or the opposite. Has anyone ever been up in those parts of the world where, Shabbos is over on Tuesday when you have things like that? You have to figure out how to end because you don't have, people there, places that don't see the sun for months at a time, or people that they don't see night for time. It's these types of interesting occurrences. And he says that's what happens here. And he says it started in the morning, meaning the night never stopped. And he goes on to explain that. Okay, let's look now. I'm just looking here at the Chizkuni, Choshech. Vayhi Choshech Perish Rashi Shiro Yisrael is Kaleihem Vayom Eina Biyadenu Chazak Dehachsiv V'Hashem Nasan Eschena Am B'Einei Mitzrayim Yashilim. Oh, here he's just saying that the part of the plague, he doesn't really go into the what he goes to the purpose of the darkness, but not necessarily the root of the word. Sforno V'Yamesh Choshech. You will sense the Choshech. V'Yasir Es HaChoshech HaTivi Shalayla. Again, the word v'yamesh is like lahasir, as the Rebbe Bachya said, is that we will remove the darkness, the natural darkness of night shall be removed. Because when you have night darkness, all you need is one light, and then you could kind of see where you're going, right? Even a little bit of moonlight. If you ever go outside and it's a full moon, you could see it's a beautiful thing. Look, I could see, or even if some of the stars. He says, but this darkness was so thick that even if you would shine light on it, it would not illuminate whatsoever. And you would not be able to remove the absence of light. He says, because even though, he says, so it's an interesting, the Sforno says, it would seem the Sforno saying is, people could light fire. They could turn on their flashlights. They could use, by the way, what's the first thing that we do when we can't see? What's the first thing we go for? Right? There's a cute little shortcut on the front of your phone. If you have this and you just hit the button and, oh, look, see? So even that wouldn't work. Steve Jobs couldn't fix Makkat Choshech. So Sforno says is, yeah, they could light all they want, but the light was so thick that they couldn't even take away the darkness around them. And that's why one couldn't see his neighbor, couldn't see his friend. The Klei Yakar, look at this Klei Yakar here. Just move that box out of the way. V'yamesh Choshech, again, Lashon Hasara. It's a language of removing. Ya'an ki miteva habriya shekol adam yesh lo yom af laila. Ma'aseh HaKadosh Baruch Hu heisir chashkas stam laila min gvul Yisrael v'nasan osam al eretz Mitzrayim. V'alkein hayam Mitzrayim choshech kaful. He says normally what happens, day, then night ends and day comes. So he says the night ended for the Jewish people, and God took that night and put it on the Egyptians. And he kind of that's why they use this language of double. He says, and that's why it says the Jewish people had or. In other words, the Jewish people, they had their regular day. The day the sun rose, and the sun rose for the Egyptians too, except God created a supernatural occurrence here where the darkness that was on the Jewish people that ended now was transferred over and given it. So they had like a double night, but it lasted for 3 days. And he has a lot of interesting things here also. Okay. If I go through here, the Ramban, here's the Ramban here. Why could people not see each other? Why didn't they get up? He says, it wasn't like oh, the sun went down and therefore it was dark. There was an absence of light. There was some sort of, the word aid is like a mist of some sort. When it talks about creation, it says v'aid ya'aleh min ha'aretz, but there was some sort of film or something that came down and from Shemayim and covered the Egyptians. He says, therefore, that's why I noticed before. Remember, we said Moshe netei yadecha al hashamayim. Ki al kain omar netei yadecha al hashamayim. Reach your hand out on the heavens, meaning laharid misham chashecha gedola nofelas aleim. Moshe had to go up to the heavens and bring down. It's like pulling down the blinds on the Egyptians and put it on top of them like a giant cover. It's like God. He had this heavenly tarp, and he took this tarp and he threw it onto the Egyptians. By the way, if you think these explanations are wild, you're not wrong. They are. But what does it show you? It shows you that people are just trying to understand what does it mean. Now, by the way, you could look through the Mefarshim on all the plagues. How does it turn into blood? And how do the frogs and Yeah, they spend a lot of time trying to figure this out. None of this is natural. These are not considered natural events. These are considered supernatural events where God created the normal teva, the normal natural occurrence of things to change or to be altered so that we could teach a lesson to our friends, the Egyptians. So the Ramban is pretty radical here. He says that Moshe actually took, it wasn't like there was just shut off the lights. No, he took something to actually cover them. And therefore, the harid misham chashecha gedolah nefelas aleihem. Right? And it was, he says, and any light they had, unlike the Sepharno said, any light they had was extinguished, right? Because anything what happens is like you throw a blanket on top of it, that's it knocks out your candle. Okay. And then he goes on and on to talk about that. Oh yeah, the Orach Chaim wanted to show this. The Orach Chaim gives one last interpretation here on the bottom. He says, he also quotes from a Medrash, She'amar shechoshech zeh haya megehenim. Ulai kishneim iskavnu ala emes. He says there's two types of choshech. There's one that's 3 days, etc. But he says this is the darkness of Gehenna. Now again, I don't know what the darkness of Gehenna is. I have a feeling I'll find out soon enough, but I don't know what exactly that darkness means. But it's just kind of eerie. The typical Orach Chaim gets a little bit mystical, but what you could see is tremendous differences of opinion, or people trying to wrap their heads around what is this choshech. Why? Because he uses the word v'yamesh, that it's some sort of sensory choshech, and also that it was 3 days. People couldn't move, they couldn't get up, they couldn't go down, etc. Okay, now this, if you want to look at that, you have it. I sent it out. If you want to look through the rest of the Bechai, he gives a few others as well. But here, what I want to share with you now is the Ksava Kabbalah. Let me see if I can rotate that. Oh, look at that. Okay, v'hi choshech. It's over here, this one. Moving everybody up here so I could see. I just have a lot of boxes I gotta move around on the screen. Okay, Velo Kama, they couldn't get up. Many people wonder how this is from the Ksava Kabbalah, which is Rav Yehuda Tzvi Mecklenburg. People wonder how such a statement could be related to the phenomenon of darkness, seeing that it is not the nature of darkness to make a person into a prisoner unable to move, physically speaking. Rav Soloveitchik wrote in a few places that kind of he wrote about it, I think, if I'm not mistaken, after his wife passed away, and he said that, darkness, nighttime was the loneliest time, and when people have their biggest fears and people have their worst moments of depression or despair, it's always in the darkness. We always talk about bringing us up, bringing us out from the darkness. There is a thing which people might experience even these days now, something called seasonal affect disorder. I don't know about you, when it's like 6 o'clock and I'm like, oh my God, was it at midnight? I'm like, no, it's 6 o'clock. It's not even Jeopardy yet. And it's depressing, right? When it gets dark at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So it's hard. And you see that, let's say people who maybe go to Florida and they come back, it's like very hard adjustment because it's so light and bright and this. So you go to one of these nice places and you come home and it's like cold and dreary. And even if the sun's out, it doesn't feel sunny because it's dreary and it gets cold so early. And even in Florida, it gets late. It gets dark like an hour later than we have here. So it's something to get to pay attention to. So here, look what he says. It's not like that we have somebody as a prisoner. Even blind people can move freely, aided by their sense of touch. See, like you said, Loris. If, on the other hand, the restriction of the Egyptians' movement was due to some thick mist or vapor, which made the air so thick that they couldn't move, how did they manage to breathe through these impenetrable mists? Good questions. You see, he's incorporating some of the interpretations that we saw. Okay, if it's thick enough to cover the light, how do you breathe? Right? It was like a giant K95 mask, maybe. No, too soon. It is not possible to argue, as does Gershuni, that they were forced to keep all their orifices closed to prevent these damaging vapors from entering their nostrils or other parts of their bodies and killing them. How could they have continued to live under such circumstances? In other words, like if it was like this noxious gas or something that had like shut themselves off, well, then that would create other difficulties. He says, who could do this for 3 days? You can't hold your breath for 3 days. He says, that's why Naftali Wesley writes that the Torah only gave us the barest outline of what happened and an outline supplemented by tradition. In Tehillim 78, it says, he lists 5 different methods which God vented his anger at the Egyptians. They were called Charon, Apo, Avra, Zam, Tzeda, Mishlach, etc. The latter phenomenon called by the psalmist Mishlachas Malachei Ra'im, a deputation of destructive agents, is what's described in the book known as Chachma Shlomo, as they were amazed, and I'm going over here, and became very frightened at the strange sights and sound. They and all the people surrounding them, and they had visions of harmful and destructive angels. We see from there that the Egyptians experienced visual discomfort. As a consequence of these frightening experiences, they became faint with fright and could not even rise from their seats as a result of this. So something happened that they become paralyzed from shock or paralyzed from fear. Now, by the way, that is something that people can relate to. Have you ever, take an example. Imagine someone who is scared of heights. I don't love heights. Like, truth is, I don't mind roller coasters, but like, do you stand on top? Has anybody ever gone to the Hudson Yards? You know, the ledge. What's that called? You know, the thing that you can, like, it's that big ledge outside the building. You know, where you ever see these things where they in China they have these bridges, you know, with glass bottoms, and people like they when they get on there, they physically can't move, because even though you know intellectually you're not going to fall, and there's nothing going to happen, but you freak out. You ever stand in a tall building and look down? And so this type of paralysis, he says, something called as these frightening appearances that became paralyzed. I'm paraphrasing the Ksava Kabbalah. They became faint with fright and couldn't even move. It was no different than the phenomenon that some people were told the very shocking news to go into a fainting spell. Right? That happens. People faint when they hear bad news. The Egyptians dared not get up. They could have if they had the courage to do so. So it's very different from when he says velo come, they didn't get up, meaning they didn't want to get up. They were afraid to get up. Not that they could not physically get up, but they were afraid to because they were worried about what might happen to them. They would just like stay put, right? If you ever come, I don't know which animal it is that you're supposed to not run. You're supposed to stay still. I don't know.
A
The
bear.
bear? Okay. So if the bear comes, I think I would run like heck, but or like the snakes that look at you in the eye or something, don't move. I don't know. I just don't. I don't want to go. I don't want to see a bear, and I don't want to see a snake, even in the zoo. So they did. Thus, he says that's what the Chachma Shlomo says. I believe that this is reflected in the additional words mitachtav afterwards v'lo kamo ish. V'lo kamo ish mitachtav. Person could not get up mitachtav, meaning is not that they could not move from their respective places, but the word tachas is to be understood as a noun describing a phenomenon. The word is also used as a, by the way, the word tachat, which in modern Hebrew on your tachat is known as your, and became, if you Hebraicize it or Yiddishize it, tachat becomes tuchas. That's where the word comes from, by the way, right? Tuchas is really tachat. It's not a Yiddish word, it's a Hebrew word, which when pronounced in that way, that's what tachat means, your bottom. He says, meaning, the word is also used as a noun in Mishlei, where the word tachat is to be understood as if the author had written kemo tachat, just as fear. In our verse, the meaning mitachtav is because of his fear. Like v'lo kamo ish mitachtav, because of his tachat, because of his debilitating fear. That's what it is. It's that's a markedly different interpretation to what everybody else was saying, where they couldn't move, they couldn't see, they couldn't. Here he says, no, they can move freely. They just were afraid to because they were paralyzed from their fear what would happen. And then he goes on to a whole thing about You want to look through the rest of it. It's good. A lot of technical stuff. The last thing I want to show you is this. Is from let's not going to work that way, upside down. Let's do it this way. Okay, the Torah Tamima. Now, this is just kind of really awesome, and I'll tell you why. I once had and it was because of this. There's an episode, I said it once in a shiur a few years ago, but I had a Rebbe in yeshiva, and students are very, very impressionable. And when like a teacher figure does something that's kind of like drastic, you kind of like you scratch your head and you're like, oh, is that okay? So I remember once he said that so the Torah Tamima takes the text, quotes Rashi, and then here on where the circle is, usually quotes something from Chazal, in Maimer Chazal, and then he has his own interpretation on the bottom. And it was because of this interpretation that I had a Rebbe in yeshiva, which I happen to disagree with, but he said that the whole sefer is treif, and he says, anything above the line is good, anything below the line is nonsense. He says, because he didn't like this interpretation. Now, I think Shiv and Panim LaTorah, the different ways to explain things, and he has a source for this, and it's that. Okay, and we were on, this past Shabbos, we were discussing about, getting rid of books. We were discussing, certain children's books from a certain author who is now, deemed to be an evil person, and I wholeheartedly think that you should get rid of those books. But it's like a hard thing to get rid of. It's like throw a book away. It's a hard thing. If you're a book person and you love books and you have respect for books, and I prefer reading out of a book than out of a Kindle. I have a hard time following in a Kindle. I don't feel like I'm necessarily reading. I don't know. Maybe that's me. But anyway, so here the Torah Tamima, Rav Epstein. V'yamesh choshech. So here the top line, he quotes the Mechilta. Magid hakasav tikashaya hamitzri omeid lo haya yachol leishev ukashiyeshev lo yachol lamon. Like she said, if he was sitting, he can stand up because he's sitting. Because he says, and I was, the pasuk says, because he was feeling the dark, because it says v'yamesh choshech. Now, that base corresponds to this base, which is his interpretation on the bottom, which comes here and starts and continues over there. So he says as follows. I know, make a little bit larger, you could see it. Okay. Now, Mivur b'midrashim, shachoshech kaya ovei dinar. Now, the Medrash says, and here the Medrash says something interesting. It quantifies the size. If you're talking about something physical, mashahu fizi, you have to give it some sort of measurement, some sort of qualification. So here the Medrash says, well, how thick was it? It was very thick, right? He said it had the darkness. It was thick. How thick was it? It was thick. They couldn't feel it. He says, Ovei dinar. It was the width or the thickness of a dinar, which is a coin. Now, that's really weird. What does that mean, the thickness of a coin? Now, we have, the last time, I don't know if anybody still uses actual money anymore, but there were these things called like pennies and dimes and nickels and quarters. They have different widths and different, diameters, etc. Uklal ha'inyan mufla ma'od. Demash shayach, and now on the bottom over here, lehispayes Shiur mamashas b'choshech. He says, first of all, why would you have to give a measurement for the darkness? And if so, v'gam tzarich in the lefi Rashi, shekol shehaya meshech ha'me'esleis kulo laila v'lo haya yom klal and kain nishtanu sidrei bereshis. And he says, if according to Rashi that the actual course of nature changed, day to night to day, etc., and it's completely changing the natural order of things. He says, don't we have at the end of the story of the flood, remember God promised to Noah, and he says, never again will I change the course of nature, that day and night won't happen. So he says, if that's happening, how could we violate that? He says, so two questions. Why give the measurement of a darkness? And second, why would we change the order of Bereshis? And he says, Velula de mistafina. Now, this is a common phrase that is found throughout Chazal, that when you see this, Lula Mistafina means I'm going to say something big, or I'm going to say something novel, or I'm going to say something that's out there, but bear with me. So what it literally means is, if I wouldn't be so afraid to say such a thing, Lahamtsi davar chadash me'od, He says, if I wasn't so, no, it's like, it's one of those things where it's followed by a but. It's Lashon Hara, but, and you go on and you say it anyway, right? So he's like, if I wouldn't be so afraid, I would have said, but he's actually saying it. So in other words, but it's a way of giving a little bit of humility, saying, I don't know, maybe you could say possibly like this. He says, Hava mina de'inyan hachoshech, hayalo ba'avia rak be'eineha anashim. He says the darkness was not in the environment. It was not in their surroundings, but rather it was in the people themselves. V'hainu shahaya matuach tavlul alishon ha'ayin. And he says that they had some sort of growth. Again, these are the original cataracts of the world, is that some growth grew over their eyes. V'amr chachamim, and Chazal then said, she'osa tavlul haya namush biyad, and that was something that they could feel. V'gam haya ka'ovi dinner, and it was the width, the thickness, or the diameter of a coin. V'nicha hakol. So he answered all the questions in one fell swoop. How do you feel darkness? How could you change the order of nature? You're not allowed to do that. Why would it have to give you the thickness of a coin or the diameter of a coin? Oh, we didn't change the teva. We didn't change. There was sunlight. But what happened? Everybody became blind. Something on their person, something on them physically. And by the way, look at your eyes. Put a nice coin over your eyes, and there you go. Now, I think that is a fairly novel interpretation, bold. It does make sense, but so my rabbi, my Rebbe in yeshiva, he didn't like that at all. I guess I don't know why, but he didn't like that. Now again, a lot of people, as I mentioned, they like to take a homiletic approach of, well, you can't say it. There was actual choshech, there was darkness, but the Jews had light. Doesn't say that the Jews didn't have affliction. Again, but what my point is that when you look through different mefarshim, you could see how everybody, you almost feel it. I feel it's like a struggle to understand what exactly is going on here, which is what we try to do. And they're here to help us, to take us and give us a shot. We say Shivim Panim LaTorah. There are 70 ways of interpreting everything, some on a simple way, some on a deeper way, et cetera, et cetera. But I wanted to finish with that crescendo, that is a novel interpretation. So starting whether there was darkness and it was just so dark that they couldn't read, or they were afraid, or the Ramban says that Moshe pulled something down from Shemayim, pulled a cover over their eyes, all the way up to the point where there wasn't actual darkness, but they had some sort of ailment in their eyes, and they didn't go to Studio Optics to get it fixed. So that's quite out there. Yeah, Gail.
So, quick question. So, I thought during Choshech, Bnei Yisrael went and took the rechush of the Mitzrayim. They took their possessions and belongings. So that's why I kind of find this interpretation interesting, because it wasn't really darkness in their surrounding area and light where Bnei Yisrael was, because Bnei Yisrael actually went into their physical locations. Did they not?
Correct. So it could mean that maybe this ailment paralyzed them such that they couldn't move. That, you know what, Bnei Yisrael could walk in with impunity and take whatever they wanted. Right. And one of the things that we forget always during this period is that, and Rashi, I didn't really go into it, but Rashi points it out, is that during this plague, one of the reasons why darkness, because those Jews who did not merit salvation, they died, and therefore they shouldn't be embarrassed in front of the tormentors. So when the Egyptians wake up, or 3 days later, they could see again, 80%, 4/5, 80% of the Jewish population is gone. Now, it's funny because you don't see people hey, where'd they go, right? Or maybe they're just so reeling from darkness, they don't know what's going on. But that's what happened, and only 20% merited to the salvation. That's when it says V'chamushim alu b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim. In next week's parsha, chamushim, normally we translate the word as armed, chamush. Today in the Israeli army, there was chamush, like if you're carrying a weapon. But one interpretation of chamushim is the word chamesh. The chamesh, only 1/5 went up from Egypt. Really interesting. So, not all great either.
Did the Jews live among the Mitzrayim, or did they live in their own ghetto neighborhood?
Well, they lived ostensibly in Goshen, but the Egyptians were their taskmasters. So while they're working, I don't know, it would seem like they woke up in the morning, and except there was no morning. So maybe the Jews didn't have to go.
Because when they went with the blood on the doorpost, they skipped over certain houses. So I would think that they lived among them.
Right, because you'd have to imagine that there was some, and, slaves, like if you have a slave population, they don't exactly just like go home to your place and come back and they have like a shuttle and, like the monorail. It's not like that.
Which makes it hard to understand how it could have been dark only for the Egyptians and not for the Jews. And this explanation is on point.
Yeah.
To show why only the Egyptians felt the darkness.
Right. But it just also goes to show you that, when we think of the word choshech, no one would think like, oh, by the way, maybe it's not darkness, maybe it's like personal darkness. That and it's something to think about, maybe also relating to other people's suffering or other people being sensitive to the needs of others, is that people have a hard time seeing someone else's darkness. Which is, we work our whole lives to try to be sensitive to the needs and the pains of others. Some people are better at it than others, but what can I say? And that's a lesson here. And even the Jews themselves, that they had to be sensitive to the fact that part of their population, a big part of the population, is now extinct, was extinguished literally after during this plague. And it kind of gets played around, but I just wanted to like kind of take this walk through the Mefarshim. It's really fascinating, and we're just scratching the surface. There's a lot more on this, but you could see that all these different, like where does the word come from? What happened here? Lots going on. So everybody, that's it. We should just stay light. I wanted to keep the shiur light, but I couldn't.
How's everyone in the family? Because you said last week you weren't able to because there was everyone okay?
I'm just gonna stop the recording. Yeah,